Hello, everybody, and welcome to PPG on Goldster. And for those of you who are new to this, PPG stands for Purpose, Passion, Grit. And here today is a wonderful woman called Mandy, Preece. And I say she's wonderful because I first heard about her through a friend of mine who said about 4 years ago, I'm going to this talk. Do you want to come? It's at the Psychical Research Society in London, and she's a soul midwife. Now that just sold me on it instantly. I thought, yes, I'm going to go. And I was so bowled over by Mandy's talk that when we started talking at Goldster about doing PPG, and we started talking about the whole idea of people with great energy, people who had something important to say. One of the first people I wrote down on my list when I was talking with Humphrey and Rosie and Alistair, my fellow presenters, and with Adam, our producer, was Mandy's name. And so finally, I've got around to asking her to come on. We've been waiting for this for a few months now. So welcome, Mandy, Preece. Thank you so much for joining us on Goldster today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. It's great.
So every time I've told somebody that I'm doing this today, they have said, hang on a minute, what's a soul midwife? So let's get that over with first.
Yeah, get it out of the way.
What is a soul midwife?
The easiest explanation is that we are holistic end-of-life companions. Some people find the term a bit Marmite because midwife, we tend to think about it with birth. Soul tends to sound like it's a religious thing. It isn't, when we're really, some of us obviously have strong faiths that we follow, but we always practice non-denominationally, so it's completely non-denominational. We're supporting people as a birth midwife, where we support people through the stages of dying, and we offer support to them and their families, and most of us are complementary therapists, and we'll bring that into our work, so it normally sits us alongside a sort of complementary therapy path. Yeah.
And so how did you get into this? When did you first hear about it?
Oh gosh, it's funny, isn't it, when life takes you on a completely different turn and you think, it's almost like these things drop into your life. I was a legal editor by profession, Lucinda, so I was sort of freelance working, editing law books, and my dad, and then my mum, and then one of my best friends, who at the time was 39, all died within a 3-year period. And I'm an only child, so obviously I was, supporting mum and dad. Mum wanted to die at home, so I nursed her at home. And then after mum died, my dear friend Fran asked if I could kind of support her as well. And I think because I'd been through what I had with mum, she felt that she could talk to me about sort of end-of-life choices. And then out of the blue, I fell pregnant. 42, suddenly I was pregnant. It was just amazing because we were told that we couldn't have children. So I had a career break. I know, it's really, really amazing. So I had a career break, and then I was thinking about going back, and one part of my brain was going, I don't think I ever want to read another law book as long as I live. And the other part of my brain was going, well, mum and dad and Fran had me and other people around them. What if you don't have anyone?
Yeah.
And thought wouldn't leave me. And then one day I saw an Art of Dying workshop. Who knew they were a thing? And I went on it, and the lady running it was a soul midwife, and she told me about the training, and I went on the training, and at the same time I'd started volunteering in our local hospice. So everything suddenly collided. So that's how it happened, really. Yeah.
And what did the training involve?
So the training involves looking at different aspects, a very different way of looking at end of life. We live in a very medicalized society, thank goodness, very grateful for that, very grateful for the NHS. But one of the things that I think has happened because of the NHS, particularly since the war, is that death and dying has moved from the home into hospitals and then later on hospices. And we're have an amazing system in this country. I'm very, very grateful for it, for caring for people at end of life. However, what what that's meant is many of us have not ever witnessed somebody at those stages of life, and that certainly have not had the experience growing up, perhaps, of having somebody very ill or dying in the home and getting used to that as children, and that becoming a normal thing. And so therefore, when we are confronted with it now, we have less experience. So the training involves very much going back and thinking, what did people do before they had the NHS? How do we support people at end of life ourselves? What skills can we support and bring forward for people? And also understanding that people go through set stages. So the training is very much about the stages that people go through as they die. And all around the world with Indigenous communities, there is a vast sort of understanding of the patterns that people go through during the dying process, particularly a huge source from Tibetan Buddhism. So all of that has been brought in by the lady who trains us, Felicity Warner. She did loads and loads of studies, talked to lots of different communities. How do you sit with the dying? What do you notice? What do we expect? So that there are patterns that we can see and we can prepare people for, so that it's not so scary, I guess, because if you don't know what death looks like on the journey, then obviously it's all new. And, you know, many of us are in the situation that I was with. You know, my dad died in hospital, then I cared for my mum. My mum was doing things and I just didn't understand she was changing, and I didn't understand why. And I think if you're empowered to understand this will happen, this will happen, and then you are so better equipped. You know, it's like we all go to birth classes, right? And we learn what's going to happen. We don't have death classes. And I think it's really important, not just for, you know, the ones we're going to care for, but also in some ways to prepare ourselves that we know that we will go through these stages too at some point. So
I think it's so important. I normally, you know, am immersed in the Victorian era when I'm writing, and it always strikes me, just as you said, that we have become so medicalized, and thank goodness, you know, the wonderful Nye Bevan, one of my absolute all-time heroes. But we have lost completely that connection. You know, when you read real life accounts from the 19th century, or look back in history, or even look at novels, and death is very much a part of life, and generations lived intergenerationally. And it is really strange. When my father died, it was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body. I was privileged enough to be with my father at the end. It was an incredible privilege. I was the only person there at that precise moment. And it was incredible, and it was very profound. And one of my friends who's a nurse, when I said it was the first time I'd seen a dead body, I'd had other people die, but I'd never actually seen their body. It's not something we tend to do. And I hadn't wanted to go. My grandfather didn't want us to go to the Chapel of Rest, for example. He wanted us to remember him in life, which I totally understand. Yes. And this friend said to me, how have you got to our age and you've never seen a dead body? Because she was a nurse. For her, it was an everyday thing. But I then asked quite a few friends, and most of them had never, ever seen a dead body. And actually, as you say, it's such an important part of life. And it becomes this kind of vampire, ghoulish kind of Hammer House of Horror type thing. People are terrified of death. And yet it's something that every single one of us will experience, not just for ourselves, but for so many people around us. How do you think we can get beyond that? How does your work help people get beyond that, do you think?
I think the first step in getting beyond it is to do exactly what we're doing here and talk about it. You know, to answer the fears, answer the questions that people may have. Because actually, you know, we've got to a point, like you say, where it's so frightening that people are scared to go. Or they will say, well, the children or the teenagers can't go, you know, and I think, yeah, they can. In fact, children cope really, really well if they see the adults coping really well. Obviously, there are some situations where you are not going to take your children. You know, so there are some situations that you will protect them from, but for the most part, my experience has always been the more involved the family are, the easier the whole process is for the person in the bed, but also for you afterwards. I met this nutty, I mean, she was an incredible, amazing woman in America, and her thing, what she did was she was supporting families who wanted to keep bodies at home after they died, because most of them, because they couldn't afford a funeral. In America, it's like it's really expensive funerals.
That's so sad.
Yeah, really sad. So a lot of people have started having like home funerals. So they keep the body, their loved one at home, and then what they do is she will support them to wash the body, keep the body at home, and then obviously you have the funeral very quickly. And she was telling me that she believes that there is there's an almondy smell to death. The body smells a bit almondy. And she was saying to me that she believes that we deep inside our DNA know that smell. And if we smell it, then we grieve in a much more, she said, the people that smell it and are a part of it seem to get a way of coping with the griefs better than those that didn't.
Gosh, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and she said, I'm sure that it's because we're still tribal animals at the end of the day, and we somewhere deep in our psyche, we cope better if we've been alongside at some part of the journey.
I mean, dogs definitely do have that. You know, once
do.
they've understood, once they have smelt the fact that somebody has died, they calm down, they are relaxed, they cope with it so much better than we do. We have a comment here. Thank you. Please do remember, everybody, you can just write anything in the chat if you've got a question or a comment for Mandy. We have a comment here. We have lost tradition and rituals around death. What do you think of that, Mandy?
I think we absolutely have. And, you know, tradition and rituals is a way of pulling us all together and creating something that allows that grief and the support to be structured so that somebody feels safe, right? And, you know, having ritual is so important. Having ritual to actually have a way of honouring that person. You're just watching what's happening with the Queen at the moment, and all the, you know, the standing in state, passing the coffin, standing by the coffin, you know, all of that reverence, actually, that's beautiful, you know. And we've been taught, I mean, the first thing I did after, obviously, an hour or so after Mum died, and my husband and I had processed that, you know, she'd gone, and we made a cup of tea and just breathed, and it was very early in the morning. So, but then the first thing you do is phone the funeral directors to come and get her. That's my biggest regret, you know, because I think actually now looking back, I could have hung out with her for a bit, you know. It doesn't have to be a rush.
And that's actually a really good tip, because we don't know what we have to do. You know, I remember just saying, you know, what do we do? Who do we have to call? What do we do? And actually, there should be a kind of guideline. You should be given like an A4 sheet of, you know, what you have to do and when. And it is, you know, really, really confusing. And it is great to have that time. We've got another comment here that says, like you, I did not see a dead body until my mother died. When I later saw the bodies of both my father and my son, I'm so sorry for this, I was able to cope better with the visuals. Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. I think you talked about ritual, Mandy, and I think what we've seen in the pandemic, nobody was allowed to have proper funerals. What do you think that did to us as a society, and do you think it did to people individually?
I think there is a lot of repressed grief now. I think people are finding it really hard, and that they feel lost because they weren't able to do the ceremonies that they wanted to do and to come together as families. And I just think it's a very important thing. But I think what we have to try and remember is that you can do those ceremonies anytime. And I suddenly thought, you know, there's nothing to stop getting back together and redoing a ceremony, you know, a farewell or a celebration of life, so that those people can have that moment with their family and friends now and create something really special. Interestingly, driving home last night with my 14-year-old son, and he was telling me they had had a 2-minute silence at school for the Queen, and he said to me, "Did you do 2-minute silence for Grandpa and Grandma when they died?" And I said, "Oh no, it's normally, you know, people who are very sort of famous or particular people." And he said, "Why?"
What a good question.
I thought, actually, you're right. And he said, "Oh, maybe next time it comes around for Granddad's birthday and Grandma's birthday, should we do 2-minute silence for them?"
What a lovely idea. Yeah, I think that's really, and perhaps we need to start our own rituals and traditions that help people. I mean, some people, you know, don't like commemorating anniversaries. They find it too mawkish. We've got a big love heart for that idea. That's gone down well, that one. The 2-minute silence, I think. Yeah, maybe as families, people do start doing new traditions and rituals. I mean, I look back at the Victorians, as I mentioned earlier, you know, their morning rituals were so ridiculous and so you know, prescriptive, and everybody was expected to behave in a certain way. And I actually wonder how much genuine grieving was permitted within the ritual, because yes, you were meant to wear black and jet earrings, and then you were maybe allowed to move into, you know, a purple or a grey, and you had to do a set number of times, but actually you weren't supposed to show any emotions. So how on earth was that really grieving if you were just dressing outwardly in that?
Yes. Another thing that we do, because obviously my son, when I started getting really involved in the work I am doing, my son was 4, and my husband had been in Venezuela during Day of the Dead years ago and is staying with the family, and they did Day of the Dead. And one of the things they did is they laid a plate and a knife and fork at the dinner table and an empty seat for all the people they'd lost. Beautiful. And then everyone took turns during dinner to talk about those people. So we decided we'd always do Day of the Dead. So on the 1st of November, we do Day of the Dead in our house every year, and we have chili, and then we put out, and Aaron will get the hamster bowl, he'll get our dog's little, you know, and it all gets laid out and a plate for, and then we go around and we talk about either people we've lost this year or people that really meant it. And for Aaron, because obviously he didn't know his grandparents, and you know, we tell him funny stories about them, so they become, and it's been brilliant because it's the one day of the year that you're absolutely allowed to talk about death and ask any questions. So Aaron's grown up with that being normal.
Yeah, someone's just written exactly what I was thinking. That's lovely. I think I love that idea. I think what a wonderful thing to adopt. You know, we've all adopted Halloween, a very Americanized version of Halloween, and it's all got ridiculous, you know, already there's all these kind of Halloween sweets in the shops and things here, but actually there's no true meaning behind it, just commerciality, whereas this is a really important spiritual day. I love that.
And the tradition of Halloween, obviously, comes from the Celtic idea of Samhain, and that was to honor those who passed. That's what Halloween was about. It's the same thing. It's you know, it's to honor those souls that have passed over. It's supposed to be a day of reverence, but you know, even in the Celtic tradition, you know, and then obviously the Christian tradition as well.
And it seems so strange we've lost that, because every single person has dead ancestors and dead friends, you know, dead family members, and yet we as you say, you never talk about it. We've got a really good question here. Have you got any tips on how to help young children with the fear of their parents dying without being cliched?
I would just be, you know, if they say, you know, are you going to die? You say yes, but not for a very long time. I think that's the, you know, obviously you can't promise that, but I mean, if children are fearful, then they go through a stage where they're aware, definitely young children go through a stage where they're aware of death, and then that becomes quite a scary thing. So say, I think I said to my son something like, yes, I will die. Everyone dies, but most people don't die, you know, live long lives, long, healthy lives, and that's the norm, something that's normal. And I think having pets really helps. I honestly, having the hamsters really helped, because I encouraged my son certainly with the second hamster, she definitely started behaving different, and I kept pointing it out because her cage was right by where we used to eat breakfast, and I said, yeah, Sandy's not well, can you see? And then when she died, I kept, I left her where she was, so that when he came home from school, I said, I've got some news for you, Sandy's died, would you like to hold her? And he said, no, not really. And then a bit later I said to him, I think I'm going to give Sandy a cuddle and we're going to start creating a box. And we went through the whole, we created ceremony, created funeral. Those sort of things are really important. And in the end, I said, we dug a little grave for in the garden. I said, you sure you don't want to hold Sandy? And he said, actually, I really do. So it's all of those things, it's keeping on. And I can remember him saying to me, why does her body feel hard? And I said, oh, that's a natural thing. All the muscles contract after you die. And he, oh, okay. Everything's normal, because it is, if we can make this as normal as possible for children, then they're going to cope.
Thank you. We've got some lovely advice here from one of our Goldster members. My husband's illness was explained to our grandchildren, and they saw him most days. When he was close to dying in hospital, my daughter brought them to see him and say their goodbyes. It was a very sad but beautiful moment. Thank you for that. So yes, normalizing it, just as you were saying. And we have another comment here. My husband died at home. He was in bed, but death was not expected. I was with him for the final minute. A paramedic came, followed by police and my son-in-law, daughter, and adult grandson. When police and paramedic left, we took turns to sit with him for the whole afternoon before the undertaker came to take him away. We sat, talked to him, and said our goodbyes, and we all got comfort from it. Thank you for sharing. That's really beautiful. I'm going to move on slightly to your book, because you have written a book as well. This is the book, Being Rock. Now, what does being rock mean? Just to say to everyone, if you can't read the subtitle, a guide to being there for yourself and others, redefining listening so we all feel heard.
Okay, well, I'll take you back to a moment on so what happened, Lucinda, is after I did my soul midwife training, I asked if I could go and sit on the ward, because I was already volunteering in the day centre, but could I sit on the ward with people who were dying on their own? And they said no, and it took a lot of pushing and persuading to give me a trial. But anyway, I had a pilot. Finally, they gave me a pilot to go and sit with people on the ward. And the first night on my ward, the staff nurse said to me, okay, I've got you on my ward. What are you going to do? And I went, how about I go listen? And she said, very good, dear, you go do that. And little did I know that what started was like this 6-year masterclass on what it means to be alongside someone so they feel heard and seen and witnessed. And what was happening is I was going along and they were seeing me as a volunteer, because I never said I was a soul midwife, and I was like, I'm Mandy, I'm a volunteer. Would you like some company? People would chat to me, and then all of a sudden, as we got to know each other, they dropped something really significant into the conversations, really big. And I would then go, oh my goodness, my brain would go, oh my goodness, this is really important. You have to listen. And I turn into an active listener, and they would respond by withdrawing. And I kept thinking, why? And then I finally worked it out that there is this different listening that we don't talk about. It's like everyday listening, and it works very differently to active listening. And that's because it generally is in the realm of the unexpected, not the expected. So if you have an expected meeting with someone, you want them to make eye contact with you, you want them to have open body language and ask you open questions and all of that, yeah. But if you've suddenly just admitted something to a stranger in a bus queue, for instance, and it does happen, as I'm sure some of you know, that's unexpected for you and unexpected for them. So therefore, there's an awful lot of vulnerability now. And if you respond by taking control as an active listener, it just heightens their vulnerability. They go, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that to that person. And they clam up, they feel really embarrassed. So I started thinking, well, I'm getting this all wrong, so I'm just going to let all the people I sit with teach me what it means to be alongside. And then I started writing notes. And my husband said to me one day, oh, you're writing a book about listening. And I said, no, not listening really. It's more like you have to be their rock. So you have to be there so they can bash and crash against you. And they know that you're still safe holding those moments, or that they can tell you all their joy and you're going to bask in the sunshine with them. So you're not going to upstage them or sort of start talking about yourself, but you're just going to be that rock that goes, yeah, that sounds amazing. So that's why it's called Being Rock. And it's all about a different way of how we can be with other people and really allow them to feel heard. It really works with kids as well. It's amazing for me. Everything I was being taught of, I was then bringing into sort of daily life. And then the second part of the book is how to rock yourself, because I realized it was all very well being able to be, you know, there for other people, but often I wasn't hearing my own needs. I wasn't hearing myself.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because you talk about, you know, being there for other people, but we all need to be heard. And so often when you are being there for someone else, it's really, really easy to forget about being there for yourself, isn't it? Taking care of yourself.
Yeah, and that's why I love what you do, because well-being, you know, we talk about well-being and everybody goes, oh yes, it's really important, but my goodness, it is so important, you know, and finding your own unique way of doing that well-being is also important. That's why I like the idea of being a rock. You know, a rock is something that's got fissures in it and bashes and crashes, and life has worn us in a certain way. So therefore, because we're so unique, we need that unique well-being package that meets us.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I have just put a link in the chat, everybody, for Mandy's book, Being Rock. We've got a couple of comments here. I think Diana, Princess of Wales, had the skill of listening, and I can see you nodding there, Mandy.
Yeah, because my dad met her quite a few times, because my dad was superintendent in police at Southampton Docks, where she used to sail on Britannia, but also the Sea Princess. She, you know, so he was in charge of the security, and he said to me, everybody that you meet from the Royals, if you meet them twice, somebody's obviously said, oh, you've met this person before. So they'll try and say, oh, it's nice to meet you again, you know. But he said, Diana was the only one that sort of would take both your hands, and she would look at you and she'd look right into your eyes, he said, and he'd look at him and say, so nice to meet you again, Superintendent. And like, it wasn't, obviously she's been told because she's meeting thousands of people,
it was
but
genuine.
the way she delivered it was like, oh yeah, I do remember you.
That's really lovely. Thank you for that. So we've got a comment here, and I wonder if you know about this. This is wonderful, and I don't know where in the country this is. Perhaps you might want to put this again into the chat. I belong to a small group of singers. We're called Liminal, on the verge of moving from one life to another. If we're invited, we send 3 or 4 of our group to gently sing to the person who is near the end of their life. Have you come across this, Mandy? What a lovely idea.
Oh no, it's just brilliant. So it's known as threshold choirs. So you're literally singing someone over the threshold between life and death.
Wow.
And I know that there are sort of, certainly in the remote islands of Scotland, is a tradition to they've got certain laments that they sing to sing somebody out.
Well, these choirs, they are from a kind of ancient tradition.
There is an ancient tradition to it, but isn't it beautiful, because it can be completely modern, and if it's they're singing the music that you love. I can't think of anything nicer really, if you love certain songs to be sung as you're you know, beautiful. Really beautiful. Oh, we're based in Cornwall. Lovely.
Right. Oh, that sounds really, really fantastic. And thank you for sharing that, putting that in the chat. Based in Cornwall. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So I wanted to ask you about writing the book. So when you wrote Being Rock, obviously you've been sitting listening to people, and you thought, you probably, as we all do, think, oh yes, I know exactly what I'm going to write. While you were writing it, did it teach you anything? Did you learn something new? Did it start to give you different ideas about the work you were doing?
Do you know what I think the thing that's most amazing about when you sort of focus your mind on a certain topic, then things start happening that you maybe would have happened anyway, but you probably wouldn't have given them the same attention. So you start noticing things that are happening in your everyday life that are teaching you whether you're on the right track or not. Or so a really, really amazing thing that happened is one of the things I've discovered about being rock is that when somebody throws a very difficult statement at us, for instance, you know, if you said to somebody, I think my husband's having an affair, and you just say it, our brains go, oh my goodness, I don't know what to say. And in that moment, we rely on a default program that we probably learned from our parents that says, this is how you reply to a tricky situation. And we all have lots of different defaults. Common ones are at least, you know, we'll say at least this, you know, you've got this, try and cheer somebody up. Mm-hmm. But we have other ones. We have like fix it ones. Oh, well, have you started doing this? We have humor, can be funny, sometimes backfires. And we have like, buck up, cheer up. We have lots of different responses, and they're all, you'll know when you've been defaulted because somebody will say a statement out straight away. It's almost so automatic. And I was on a walk with some friends, and one of my friends said to her husband, who's 50, her husband said he's 15 years older than her. He said, I'm going to be 50 next week and I'm dreading it. And she said, oh, shut up, it's not like you're going to die or anything. That's what she said. And I thought, whoa, that was straight out, you know, default, straight out. And the following week, I'm in meditation class and somebody said, oh, I'm not feeling so great because I've realised my 50th birthday is coming up and I'm absolutely dreading it. And we're all like, okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is strange. Her reason for dreading it is that 2 of her siblings had died in their 50th year. I thought, wow, what if she'd heard my friend's default response? It really hit me, Lucinda. And so what I found extraordinary about writing is the moment that you really focus in on something, you see all these things. You know, it's the same thing, isn't it? If you decide, oh, I'd really like a purple car, and you start seeing purple cars. It's
when you learn a new word and then suddenly you read it in practically every book you pick up and think, how did I never know this word before? It's obviously been around there in the ether, but yes, there
exactly.
are things.
So I think that was one thing. And the other thing is the reason I had time to end up writing the book is because I burnt out really badly, wasn't doing the well-being. So it was therapeutic for me. It was something that I sat every day in this room, bought myself a lovely little table that you can't see, but it's really gorgeous. And I would sit here and write. And it got me well.
I think that's so often the case. And we do, you may not be aware of this, but on Goldster, there are lots of different classes. And one of them is a creative writing class. And I know we talk a lot at the book club, which is the other program I present on. And people talk about writing. A lot of authors talk about how writing has helped them through some really, really tough times. And I know that lots of people, I can see people nodding, actually, lots of people on Goldster are also writing. So I think it's such an important part. And again, a tradition of getting things down, writing letters to inform someone of a death. Now we just, send emails or put it on Facebook, but that act of simply sitting down and handwriting to somebody, that was a ritual. I've got a question here at the end. I'm going to ask that question at the end, actually. Thanks, because that's one of my questions. Don't you worry. Just to say, so I wanted to talk a little bit more. You mentioned in your book something about the impact that social media has had on mental health. What do you think we can do about that? And tell us a little bit about how you think it's had an impact.
Well, I think the difficulty for a lot of us now is because social media is such a big part of our personal lives and our work life, that can be really, really hard to switch off from it. And so therefore, we're communicating here and not looking up and communicating face to face. One of the biggest things, and it really saddens me to see, is how people will be sitting in pubs, go out with each other, and then they're both on their phones. And you think it's because it's so addictive and we want to keep in contact, and we're getting that hit all the time from likes and and also the ping that calls us back to the phone. But what that's doing is we're missing all the body language and those moments where, you know, you really laugh. I mean, you just don't get that on social media. You might have a giggle and think, oh, that's quite funny. But you know that when you're sitting with your best mate in a cafe and you're crying and you've got your legs crossed, that one, you don't get that from social media. So I think for a lot of us, we're probably in the generations where it's impacting, but it's not impacting that much. My worry is, what's it doing to the generations under us, you know, the younger ones? And also there was a study came out, which is super worrying. So apparently when you smile and your baby first smiles back at you, it takes the baby like 15 or 20 seconds to register, mummy's smiling, and then baby smiles back. And it's only when they get the smile back again that their brain begins to learn, this is a smile, this is what we do. A lot of times what's happening now is mummy smiles, baby smiles back, mummy's looking at phone. And these children are getting the feedback. Yeah. So from a mental health point of view, I think this can be really, really damaging. The other thing is we lose ourselves in it. Honestly, it's so easy to get just on the phone, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's, for me, I've realized there's a big difference between, rather than self-care, I like nurture. So there's a big difference between numbing and nurture. And we'll talk about that in the book. So numbing is really good because it's, if you're really in a bad state, it allows you to just switch off and lose yourself in something really, really good. But if we're just flicking through Facebook, I can guarantee that you will, although you've switched your brain off from the thing you're worried about, when you come out of numbland, you won't feel any different to when you went in. You've just had a break. Whereas nurture is when you come out the other, if you do something that really is good for you, then you actually have had a brain break, but you also feel better. You're improving your mental health.
Good, thank you. Now you have won a couple of awards, haven't you? Tell us about the Princess Royal Training Award. What was that?
Oh, that was just brilliant because they're so supportive. So my amazing volunteer coordinator, when the next stage in the story is I asked if I could deliver volunteer training, because the training that volunteers were having was from the medical staff, which was amazing, but we're not professionals, so we can't do the things they're doing. So therefore it wasn't quite fit for purpose. And so I asked if I could start developing some training. And then when we got the training program out and we were running it out, my volunteer coordinator applied to Princess Royal Training Awards and said, "Do you want to come and see Mandy's training?" And yeah, we couldn't believe it when we won that. That was great. And got to go to St James's Palace, and it was all it was very exciting. But yeah, it's been really great because they give you so much feedback, and then I'm part of the alumni now and they're really supportive. Yeah, it was amazing.
So we have a comment here. I've been told I should train as a soul midwife. Who did you train with? And really what I wanted to ask is what advice do you have for anybody here who is interested after hearing you talk in becoming a soul midwife or just finding out more about it?
Well, there's two sorts of paths that you can go down in this country. So death doulas and the soul midwives. So the way I would probably sort of divide them slightly is soul midwives tend to be more complementary therapy, holistic side, and death doulas not quite so much. It's a bit of a generalization, but that's probably where I would draw the line. So I would look at both and see which course calls you, which feels better for you, you as a person. And then death doulas, if you just do Death Doulas UK, you'll find them. Doula means the same as sort of midwife, really. It's just another word for midwife. And then soul midwives, I did the training with Felicity Warner, and that's soulmidwives.co.uk, so very easy to find.
Great, thank you. We have a comment here that says, wonderful, Mandy, thank you. I've really enjoyed hearing you and feel this is such an ancient tradition that we have lost touch with. I read somewhere ages ago that the Egyptians had priestesses who helped souls over on their journey. Sadly, I can't find the link for today, but I'm glad to hear this practice is being readopted. Did you know about that?
Yeah, they were called the Sisterhood of Isis. And it's really interesting because Isis carries the Ankh. So if you see a picture, that cross book's got the loop on top, and that means the key to the doorway of life. I find it really fascinating. So the priestesses of Isis were the ones that would have traveled almost like shamans and help people to cross, would sit with people who were dying. There is so much. The moment you sort of unravel it all, it's just so many traditions in so many different societies around the world and cultures. Just incredible.
So does it feel wonderful to think that you are continuing such an ancient tradition? You're kind of
Yeah,
bringing it into the modern age and reminding people that it exists.
I just feel so privileged. You know, it's amazing. It is really, really incredible work, and I really love inspiring other people to, you know, either do the work yourself or just allow yourself to experience, you know, to be with people. I mean, I just think it is the most profound thing that you'll probably do in your life, is to sit with somebody who's dying. And I was listening to Ram Dass the other evening, and he said he really enjoyed the privilege of sitting with someone at end of life, because it is the moment in your life when you are faced with complete truth.
Oh, that's such an interesting point. Yes. And it really is. I've been struck for the several years since my father died, the absolute privilege. It is extraordinary. And I had no idea that I would feel that way. I've just put a few things in the chat, everybody. I've put Mandy's Instagram handle in there, and also her website, but also the website that she mentioned, the soulmidwives.co.uk, if anybody is interested. And could they just go and talk to their local hospice, for example, and see whether they have a training program, or if they
local hospices, they don't, some of them have soul midwives, but mostly it's best to say, you know, can I volunteer, and then see if they've got, you know, end of life. Just volunteering for a hospice is amazing. I mean, I was so lucky because I ended up working on what we called Motor Neuron Wednesday with all the motor neuron patients, and I did that for 2 years before I went on the ward. And the privilege of sitting with people who really have to know that there's no cure. You know, they've had to really dig deep. The privilege of, and the humor. I mean, honestly, I've never laughed so much as I did working, you know, having the privilege of being with those guys. They have such a very deep take on what it means to live and face death, you know. So yeah.
Now, you won another award. You won the NHS Unsung Hero Volunteer of the Year award. What was that like?
It's just like the Oscars, to be honest, because they had, it was hard actually, because they'd have 3 volunteers in every category, and then they go, the winner is, and part of you goes, oh, because it was so lovely to win, but like the other 2 were amazing, you know, and it felt a bit weird. It was really great. It was really great, and also it was so exciting meeting lots of other people. So the lady I sat next to had trained to do cosmetics for burns at the end of the Second World War for the Spitfire pilots, and she was in her 80s, 90s still doing it. So she won the Lifetime Volunteer Award.
Wow.
And she was still working with burns victims, helping them to do makeup so that they could cover their scars.
Wow.
I know.
Brilliant. You must meet some really fascinating people in your work.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you really do. I'll get, you know, because everybody's a stranger, you know, normally it's very rare to meet anybody, you know. So you get this whole sort of beautiful quilt pattern of life that you see before you. I can remember sitting with one man, and I said, well, what did you do for a living? And he said, oh, it was really boring. I used to mend pipelines, oil pipelines. And I said, really? That sounds quite fascinating. And then he started telling me about how he had to have, like, be in Saudi Arabia protected by machine guns, or how he'd once suddenly seen a polar bear when he was up in, Greenland somewhere, and it's just like coming towards him. And I think, people are extraordinary, aren't they?
Yeah. And also everything you do becomes routine. So other people might think what you do is extraordinary, but for you, it's an everyday thing. And I think a lot of people, particularly, are quite humble. I've worked in a care home. When I was at university, I worked in a care home, and I just loved hearing people's stories, and they'd always be very humble. And then once you got chatting to other people, you'd find out that they'd done all sorts of incredible things that they just hadn't ever mentioned. And it's very easy to pigeonhole people, particularly older people. I get frustrated how people just say, oh yeah, just, they're just old, as if they don't have incredible life experience and wonderful things that have happened to them. There's very much the cult of youth, which I think, is hopefully starting to change a bit, but just this belief that, it's it's got to be boring. If you're old, you haven't done anything interesting.
I'm a big proponent of trying to create space for people. So if they go into hospital, trying to create some sort of space for them that shows everybody who they are. They're not just a person in the bed, but they're this amazing person. I can remember sitting with one lady who'd fostered over 100 children, and her birth children had found their photos and had blue tacked them all around the room. Most amazing place to ever sit. Yeah, and I think, why don't we all do that? Why don't we cover the room with, this is who the person is in the bed?
That sounds fantastic. I've got two questions here. The first one is, are your courses funded by the NHS?
Okay. I do a different training. So I do volunteer training. So that's become my main job now. I train volunteers, and it's not soul midwifery training. It's more like, how do you approach a patient in the bed? So we call it patient approach, and how do we listen to them and be alongside? And I do get paid by the NHS when I deliver that. Yes, for sure. Soul midwifery is still a private sort of thing at the moment. Yeah. I think there's one GP in Cornwall, GP practice, that is actually paying soul midwives, but it's still early days.
Thank you. And then we have another, this is a fascinating question. Have any of your patients previously experienced near-death experiences, or NDEs? And what do you think of the idea of near-death experiences? Okay,
so nobody that I've actually sat with has had NEDs, but I do know people that have had NEDs. So I've met a few people, because obviously anybody that's involved with death, we talk death a lot. So then, so I met a lady only last week, actually, who'd had a near-death experience, but quite a good friend of mine had a near-death experience, and then researched it. It's really interesting, the commonalities that people say they experience. Love being the top one, which is really, really nice. And whether I don't think it matters actually whether you believe that that's because there is, beings that are waiting for you, or whether you think, well, it's the brain is doing something as it shuts down. But isn't that nice to know that across the board, everybody talks about the immense feeling of love? Well, great.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps we need to do a Goldster Day on near-death experiences at some point.
Oh, well, I know the lady for you for that one.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to send me their details. So another comment here, very moving to share the experiences and wisdom of two wonderful women who've been so close to death so often and so recently. And Mandy allows us to hope for that good death that we all wish for, and makes it happen for so many. Thank you. That's very kind.
Oh, that's really lovely.
You're going to make me cry. So moving swiftly on, I'm actually going to tell everybody what's coming up in the immediate future on Goldster. And everybody knows, I think, that it is Agatha Christie month on Goldster, which is very, very exciting. Just so that I hope you're all reading Appointment with Death. Very appropriate title for today. Appointment with Death, which is our book of the month, which is happening on the last Friday of the month, 30th of September. Now, inside story next week, Humphrey is chatting to Vivian Kinross about, he's a Nile expert, and of course, Death on the Nile is a Nile expert. And then he is talking to Daniela Burnett, who has written a book called A Mind to Murder, which begins at a performance of the Agatha Christie play The Mousetrap, which of course, as we know, is a record-breaking play. And just to say that also coming up on the book club, before I get back to PPG, is tomorrow night, and this I'm very excited about. You all know how excited I am about my crime fiction. I'm doing a special author to author. Thank you for laughing there, Sue. I've got a special author to author with Ellie Griffiths, one of our best-selling crime authors. It's at 5:30 p.m. You may have seen it advertised at 6:30 p.m. It is at 5:30 p.m. now. Ellie Griffiths really made me laugh. She emailed me and she said, oh my goodness, I might be able to remember Agatha Christie's birthday. Turns out I'd forgotten my sister-in-law's and I've got to go out for dinner tomorrow night. So we have had to change it. So I hope that's okay. Obviously, if you can't make 5:30, you can, of course, watch the recording on catch up. But it's 5:30 p.m. And those of you who've been with Goldster for a while know that she came and did one of our early inside stories. She's going to be talking about having written a new Miss Marple story, which was commissioned by HarperCollins, and her, obviously, all her other works as well, the great Ruth Galloway books and the Brighton Mysteries. Plus, she's just absolutely lovely, as we know from having met her before. And PPG, of course, you must try and catch up with the recent recording of Adam, who's our wonderful producer, Adam Williams. He interviewed Rosie, our fantastic Rosie Stancer, who is, of course, our resident explorer. And she is going on her own new expedition, crossing the Sinai Peninsula by foot and camel. And it's just incredible. So do look on the Goldster website and watch that recording. And then just coming up next on PPG, sorry, my computer's decided to go a bit bonkers. Next week is Alistair Hignell, and he is talking to Nigel Walker, an Olympic track and field athlete for GB and an international rugby player for Wales. He's been head of sport for BBC Wales and a national director of the English Institute of Sport. And in 2018, he was included on the list of 100 brilliant Black and Welsh people during the celebrations for Black History Month. As you know, Alistair himself is a sports personality, and it's just, he always chooses some really, really interesting guests. So back to you, Mandy. So yes, it's Agatha Christie month on Goldster. Are you an Agatha Christie fan?
Oh, I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan. I think, when I was younger, I was just like, I think I went to see Death on the Nile when it came out. I think it must be 14th birthday, and all my friends dragged them along. That was my birthday treat. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so there's just a real part of us that we all grow up with Agatha Christie, don't we? And we all love her. We've got some wonderful guests, as everybody knows. So do come back, Mandy. Come and join us.
I'd love to
watch them all. So we've got a couple of comments here. Somebody's talking about near-death experiences. Mickey Havelock, Dying to See You. Is that a book? I'm not sure. Or yeah, it is. And we've got a comment here from Nick saying, thank you so much. Very inspiring conversation. A comment about Ellie Griffith, a wonderful person and an excellent writer. Tomorrow night, 5:30. Don't forget. Now, thank you so much. What a fascinating subject. And Mandy, your passion and beautiful soul are inspiring. Thank you. And thank you, Geeta, for remembering the lovely Ben and Joe. But we're not finishing quite yet. We've got a few more minutes. Now, Mandy, you've talked about the need for taking care of ourselves, our mental health. And you talked about the fact that writing the book was because you'd had a complete breakdown. You needed to take time for yourself. Well, Goldster is all about healthy aging. What do you do now that you've taken control of your mental health and you've decided, I'm going to stay well? What do you do in your personal life that helps you keep sane?
Well, I do mad dancing in the kitchen. So I used to live with the Sikh family. So I'm very, very rubbish at doing Bhangra, but I do try my best, and I love the music. So Alexa goes on and I do that. And my son goes, oh, here we go again. And I'm off doing it. The big thing is walking for me. I walk a lot, but I've decided that sometimes I need to go walking around totally on my own. I have no responsibilities of not being a mum or a friend or not even taking the dog, just me. And sometimes I go off for like 3 days if I can and just walk, and just I've got a little pop-up tent. I just, camp on my own. It's great.
And what is that like? Where do you choose to go? Do you go to the same place all the time? Do you discover different places?
I normally discover different places, but at the moment I've found a really nice campsite in the Purbex, and that's enabled me to do lots of different walks. So that's where I'm exploring at the moment. So that's really lovely. Yeah. So I've been there with my son twice this summer holidays, and then I did 3 days on my own just before the summer holidays. So yeah.
And when you're walking on your own, do you just completely zone out? Do you just look at nature, or do you find yourself thinking about things and coming up with new ideas? Have you got a new book in there, or are you changing your training practices?
I do. I do a bit of both. I sometimes really start sort of like teaching in my head what's the next thing coming, and I do always have a notebook and a pen with me in my little bag that I carry. But last time I decided, you know, when you're backpacking or you're traveling on your own, you talk to everybody and you're so much more friendly when you that. It suddenly occurred to me, I don't really do that in England. I don't know why. So I decided my new thing was going to be, I was going to talk to everyone that I met. And I just had the most fascinating, the Saturday where I was walking all day. I was walking along the path with people. I was just having an amazing time. And yeah, I had a really great time just chatting with people.
It's so true. And it really, really touches me when you say about the backpacking thing, because I've done a lot of backpacking, and those conversations, those really deep conversations you have with strangers you're never going to see again. Sometimes you do, sometimes you become great friends, but sometimes you never see them again. But you have amazingly honest conversations in a way that I don't think we do have in everyday life, particularly perhaps in the UK, though maybe that's being a bit too generalistic. But you just connect with people on a totally different level. And I've had people tell me incredibly deep kind of secrets, really, where they just want to talk. And it is amazing. And to think that you're connecting in that way is, this is touched a chord with somebody here. Agreed. Solo camping and solo walking and solo travel are so good for sorting your own head out. Absolutely. I really agree. And a lot of people are scared of solo traveling, but actually once you take the plunge and you do it, it is so empowering, and just get to spend some time with yourself, which you don't always get the chance to do.
And I think you realize how kind people are. You know, I think, you know, everybody was going, oh, isn't it scary? And I said, no, my own experience has always been, you know, how supportive people are to lone travellers, actually.
I agree. Just very quickly, the one thing I wanted to ask you about is the NHS Help Force Steering Group on volunteering. Now, you're involved with that. Can you tell us quickly what that is, what it involves?
Yeah, that was something I was involved in prior to lockdown, because we were right in the middle of it. And then, of course, lockdown came and everything had to change. But Help Force is amazing. So the idea of Help Force is to get so many people volunteering for the NHS. As you can understand, they've had to readjust all of that because of lockdown, and it's still in the process of being rebuilt. But what was amazing of being about the steering group was being that volunteer voice, and you know, giving everybody, you know, I was sitting with chief nurse officers, you know, and they were very high up people in the room, and I had to sort of dig deep and find my courage, and every now and again go, oh, have you thought about how it might be for a volunteer, you know? So
yes,
it's amazing. I felt very grown up, Lucinda.
Well done you for doing that. That's brilliant. So just to end, I just wanted to ask you, what has being a sole midwife taught you, do you think? Has it changed from being a legal editor?
Oh gosh, yes, changed from being a legal editor. I think what a sole midwife has done for me is to understand the power of connection between people, and it doesn't need to just be people that you know. The power of connection. I would say that every single person I sit with either teaches me something about me that I need to learn, or gives me a nugget of wisdom that I can pay forward. And that's happened every single time, every time. And sometimes it's really hard because you learn something about you that you really have to dig deep and think, oh, wow, okay. I need to change how I am with people. But the gift of sitting with people is always straight back at you, because you learn so much about how to live more presently. You do, and to appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And I'd also like to say a personal thank you to everyone at Goldster and to Mandy, because as a lot of you know, I've had a very difficult week with losing my own mother, who was wonderful. And I was with her at the end, which was amazing. And Mandy very kindly, when we had our prep chat, gave me some really great advice. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Humphrey and Adam and Ben from Goldster, who've been amazing in helping out in the last week, and to those of you who sent me sweet messages on Twitter as well. So I will see you all next week. You've got Humphrey with you this week. I think I've got that right. I'm a bit all over the place with my dates at the moment. Do check out I'm with you tomorrow night with Ellie Griffiths. My goodness, I can just feel that force coming through from Ben saying, no, you're on tomorrow night. So I will see you tomorrow night, but Humphrey will be back with you for Inside Story on Thursday. And We will also be back with Alistair for PPG next Tuesday. Mandy, you've been an absolute star.
Oh.
Thank you so much. It was so coincidental that this happened this week. I feel it was actually ordained that it should happen. Thank you so much for coming along. It's been great to see people. And I know we've actually got a couple of people joining from the other side of the world. So for those of you from Australia and New Zealand, thank you so much for being here in the middle of the night for you. Take care and speak to you soon. On one comment here, thank you for facing a difficult subject, which I think is, as you said, the key to starting to change the way that we do ignore death normally.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you for having
Have a great
me.
week. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.